or you call me a monster and an animal for defending the situation, I will say this. The cop was following the procedure.
Never said I oppose fracking. Show the tape. Put it on your website. Put it on the website.
Live from Clark Studios in Rochester, New York. Broadcasting around the world. You're listening to You Made It Political, where the voice of the keyboard warrior is finally heard and the arguments presented are put to the political test. And now, here's your host, Matt Clark.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the show. Today is Tuesday. Beautiful day here in upstate New York. Man, are we having some nice spring weather, but don't get used to it, guys. As we always know, this time of the year, we get teased with great, beautiful weather. We all hit the bars for happy hour fun, and then all of a sudden, winter comes back. It just is so crazy and unpredictable in these parts of the woods. But if you are in the nicer parts of the world, I'm very happy for you all that we're finally into spring. COVID has most certainly turned this world upside down. It's no disputing or denying the fact that we have all gone absolutely bonkers and crazy, and our government continues to spend millions and millions of dollars, and nobody's really seemed to do anything about it. The stimulus bills are at all-time highs. The national debt is at nearly $28 trillion, and no one seems to be batting an eye at how outrageous things are getting. You'd think economists would be screaming and going absolutely mental over this situation, but we barely hear from them as well. It's almost like we've gotten used to the fact that the American government and the amount of debt we're in is almost normal. It's going to screw us. At some point, it absolutely is. Our children are in trouble. Inflation's going to go through the roof. There's no getting around it. So you'd think at some point we'd stop spending, right? You'd think at some point we'd say, hey, wait a second, this has gone too far. Well, no, because Biden's in charge. And the liberals, they seem to make decisions based on emotion, not logic. This is why we're in this ridiculous situation in the first place. Emotion drives America right now. And the liberal stupidity in all of this is certainly sending shockwaves through the country. State by state, we're going broke. First the blue states, ultimately the red states, because the red states, even though they've been great about the whole thing, are going to have to pay for the stupidity of the blue states. It's called federal taxes, people. So if you're in a red state and you think that you're going to be just fine from all this because your governor's made great decisions, well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but sorry, our very one and only dumbass Cuomo is going to make you all pay dearly, especially after the $50 billion bailout that Biden just threw his boy. So the whole country's doomed. We all know that. There's no denying it. There's no disputing it. So you'd think enough would be enough, right? After Biden paid out trillions of more dollars and now our third round of stimulus. But nope, eviction freezes are now being suspended. The federal ban on evictions has been extended yet again. This is new news. Are you surprised? Because again, Biden doesn't want to make anybody go back to work. Biden doesn't want to put this country back to a state of normalcy. We want to continue to run from the inevitable, hide from a virus that's eventually going to get us all anyway, and kid ourselves with eviction freezes. So the federal ban on evictions have been extended yet again, bringing relief to tens of millions of renters struggling to catch up. The first thing I see this morning on CNN. You'd think enough was enough. Let's head over to CNN now and check out the insanity of what's going on and why this is going to send this country into further bankruptcy beyond repair, pretty much at this point. Let's check it out. So the federal ban on evictions, after we've already spent trillions of dollars in stimulus, and we've let renters off the hook for a year now, like literally almost a year. Renters have not had to pay their rent. Like, I don't even get it, how this is acceptable here in this country. I've had to pay my mortgage. Landlords have had to pay their mortgage. Everybody's had to pay. except for the renters. They continue to enjoy rent-free living. So this has been going on for a long time now. And you think after all the money that we just sent them, the $600 and the other $600 and the $1,400 and the PPP and everything else that we've been trying to do to stimulate this economy, you'd think they would have made smart decisions with that money and eventually gotten themselves back on track. Well, no, clearly they haven't. So it begs the question, if they haven't gotten back on track after almost a year, is the answer really extending the eviction freeze once again? Is that really the smartest thing to do? Again, if they haven't gotten back on track in this time period, I think it's safe to say that they're probably not going to get back on track. As a matter of fact, most people are stockpiling cash, knowing they're never going to pay that rent, leaving landlords completely screwed in the long run. These landlords who have done nothing wrong, they have paid their mortgages on time, even though they themselves are not collecting rent, are suffering, struggling, literally losing the shirt off their back because they're now paying for someone else to live in their property. So these landlords have been paying their mortgages to the bank the entire time. The Democratic governors in ridiculous states like California and New York have allowed renters to live rent-free, not taking into consideration what the landlord themselves going through, what these commercial real estate landlords are going through, who are millions of dollars in debt right now over this nonsense. So the CDC, for some reason, has a say in what happens to landlords and their properties. That's where the insanity is at an all-time high. The CDC extends eviction moratorium until June 30th. My question is, since when does the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, a health organization, have anything to do with deciding the fate of the United States economy? But are you shocked? Because Fauci has literally destroyed practically every entrepreneur's life in a democratic state. So it's no wonder that the CDC is now able to call the shots on what happens to landlords and their tenants, because they are the ones who continuously push this very left-wing socialist agenda. They're letting renters off the hook for a virus that we all know has a 99.7% survival rate. It's all to push the narrative. It's all to keep people suppressed so they continue to rely more and more on the government. It's because we all know we're headed towards a socialist agenda. There's no disputing that. The writing's on the wall. And the CDC and the left-wing media and the Democrats are all in it together. More stimulus money, more rent-free money. We're now trying to send reparations to the black community in certain states that I guess the money's going to come from the sale of marijuana. So it's all about free money. That's all the Democrats know right now. They're not using logic to understand economically what the future holds for us. And this is why the Republicans continue to get so furious, because they think logically. They think economically. I mean, it's very simple, folks. If you keep printing money and giving away free money like this, inflation's going to go through the roof, or you're going to have to borrow it from other countries and you're going to have to pay it back at extortionate interest rates. China has practically sold off all our US dollars for gold, so they can care less if we go down the shitter financially. We don't even owe them money anymore. They just got rid of our dollars a long time ago. To what country? Who knows? They're probably the ones who are having a much bigger issue. But we keep making decisions like this. And it's really, for those of you who don't understand economics, it's really going to put a huge financial strain on future generations. You might not care because you got your COVID check and you went and spent it on a new washer machine or a vacation or whatever it is that people are spending their money on. But the problem is that money's got to be paid back. So all these landlords now who can't pay their rent or their mortgage, all these landlords that can't pay their mortgage are now having their properties foreclosed. What's the bank going to do with all these properties? Well, the banks are going to go to the federal government because most of the mortgages are backed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So we know the federal government backs pretty much all the real estate mortgage loans, whether it's residential or commercial. So the landlord can't pay their mortgage because the state is allowing the renter to get off scot-free. The landlord's now going to the mortgage saying, hey, listen, our dumbass governor is not making my tenants pay me. I can't pay this mortgage anymore. I can't keep up with my finances. So the bank's going to do one of two things. They're either going to foreclose on that property or they're going to go to Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and say, hey, we need some more money from the government, please. You got to help us out. After all, you're the one doing this to these landlords. So what are they going to do? Print more money. So we're printing money on all ends of the spectrum right now because this is all the Democrats know how to do is print money. See, they're not a party of hustle. The Democrats are not a party of hustle. They're liberal teachers. They're 9-to-5 workers. Not that there's anything wrong with 9-to-5 workers, because a lot of you guys are great for society and you're hustling and you're making good money for both yourselves and the economy. But they're not entrepreneurial like-minded. So they don't know what it's like for a business to stand on its own 2 feet. And we all know the government is the last person in the world who actually knows how to run an economy because they don't have to make smart decisions for the better good of their financial situation. All they do is tax the people when they want more money. It's very simple. Raise taxes, which is another serious consequence coming. And we all know it. Biden's not even trying to hide it. He's saying, and has told us a million times, I'm just going to raise taxes. He came in on a campaign promise of raising taxes. And he keeps playing you all like a fool because he's telling you that he's going to raise taxes on the rich. Well, guess what, people? The rich do not pay tax. None of them do. They all know how to get out of tax. They know how to write things off. Whenever taxes go up, they shift their businesses to more tax-advantaged states, hence the reason a lot of these companies are set up in Delaware, or they'll just straight up move it offshore to a tax haven in a different country, which is what I've personally done to avoid tax legally. Not evade tax, avoid tax. I've had companies set up in different countries because I have a lot of my business online. So if other countries are paying me, I funnel that offshore revenue source, the Nexus offshore, which is completely legit and above law, to my offshore account. Therefore, I don't actually have money coming into the States. Therefore, I'm not taxed. Now, I'm taxed globally as an American citizen, but there's a lot of ways that I can write that tax off. So the point is that we're always strategizing and we're always one step ahead of the government's tax hikes. The people who get seriously crushed over this insanity are the middle class, not the poor class, because they don't make enough money to be in brackets where they're going to get affected by the tax. The middle class always get hurt, but you Democrats never learn. This has happened time and time again, and you keep falling for the same socialist dangled carrot that they constantly put in front of you. Here's some free money. I promise that, you won't have to pay it back. This is how they get you hooked on socialism. Meanwhile, they're raising taxes. Inflation's going through the roof. And it's all being passed down to the middle class. Because the middle class, they tend to not be able to write their expenses off against their income because they don't have their own businesses. The typical W-2 employee here in America, they can't write expenses off against their income. So if you make $200,000, you're getting taxed at 40%, maybe even 50%. Compared to some of these potential tax hikes that we've seen. So 200 grand times 50%, there's 100 grand out the window to tax, and you can't write a damn penny off. Me? I can write pretty much the whole thing off. Hence the reason my effective tax rate is always around 11% mark. I can make $500,000 and still pay effective 11 to 13 or 15%. because I can expense things. I can write things off. By no means am I trying to put myself on a pedestal here and say that I'm in the rich elite category, because unfortunately I'm not. But as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, I'm able to write things off. As a W-2 employee, you're not. Hence the reason the middle class constantly gets crushed. So when I see things like this, when I see things that the federal ban on evictions has been extended yet again, bringing relief. And see, I love how CNN spins it. Bringing relief to tens of millions of renters struggling to catch up. Well, here's my question. Everywhere I go, and you may have seen this too, you drive around town or city or wherever you live, there's a million help wanted signs. So my question is, are these people really struggling to catch up? Or are they taking advantage of COVID and playing the Democrats like fools? Are they staying home crying COVID so they don't have to get a job that they didn't want in the first place? Is this the lazy millennials' way out to never having to work? Because I don't really understand how anybody's struggling when there are help wanted signs on every single street corner, fast food, big box stores. These businesses can't get enough help. And I've talked to these entrepreneurs and these business owners, and I said, hey, why are the Democrats making it look like everyone's struggling when I see help wanted signs all over the place? And it's a very simple answer every single time. It's because the Biden administration keeps letting them off the hook to cry COVID. So they say we can't hire employees because nobody wants to work. They're sitting home collecting their COVID bonus pay, their stimulus checks, and everything else that the Democrats want to throw their way. So this here, this federal ban on evictions being extended yet again, causes and promotes and encourages total laziness. And laziness is what breaks this country and sends us down a socialist route. And the Democrats know exactly what they're doing. This has been their game plan the whole time. They just needed a trigger to get the ball rolling. Cue COVID. We all know whether COVID was a scam or not, it's neither here nor there anymore. It's not even a point worth arguing. The point is that they certainly took advantage of it, jumped on board that bandwagon, and used every opportunity to now go down this socialist route. So I don't believe that Americans are struggling. I don't believe that they can't find work. I believe there's work everywhere. I just think they're too goddamn lazy to get off their ass and go work at a job they probably aren't going to be happy with, but that's life. Our parents, our grandparents, they grew up hustling, working jobs they didn't like, 2-3 jobs, emerging market countries. They're laughing at us right now. The Chinese have never been able to not work because they're hustlers. They always find a way. The Japanese, Thai, emerging market countries, they know what true hustle is. They don't just sit home if they feel lazy. If they sit home, they don't make money. The Chinese government, they didn't throw the Chinese a single dime when they were locked down for 2 months. Not a single dime did the Chinese get when they were locked down. And I know this firsthand because my wife is Chinese. We have very close ties to Shanghai. All my in-laws are in Shanghai, China. I've got a direct line to exactly what's going on the ground in China. I don't need CNN to report to me. I pick up the phone, we call them, we discuss it. So when the Chinese locked down the country for 2 months, they didn't give him a single penny. We didn't hear him crying for COVID relief. We didn't hear him crying for eviction freezes. They did what they had to do. They bounced back. They're a resilient bunch that we can actually learn a lot from when it comes to work ethic and hustle. And they're doing just fine. We didn't see unemployment shoot through the roof over there. We didn't see the country crumble to its knees financially. And they didn't get a goddamn penny for being locked down. And they were in a true lockdown. Nothing like this hybrid. We kind of want you to lock down, but we know you're going to do whatever you want anyway because the Constitution basically says that we can't lock you down, but let's all try. So the states all did their own thing. Nobody really locked down at the end of the day. And we're sitting here crying for more money, even though there's been a ton of work this entire time. So I think the whole thing's a farce. I think it's absolute BS. I think there is work out there. I just don't think the younger generation, and even the older generation, sadly, at this point, cares to work. Because the Democrats have let them off the hook, and the Democrats are ultimately going to be responsible for the collapse of this country. Let's over to the Keyboard Warrior Cam and see what the American people have to say about the insanity of, once again, the federal ban on evictions being extended, bringing relief, as they like to call it, to tens of millions of renters struggling to catch up. I wouldn't call it relief. I'd call it false hope, because it's exactly what we're giving everybody right now. If they haven't been able to bounce back right now, after a year, I think it's safe to say they're not bouncing back. So you can't evict anybody. Danita says, I understand the purpose of the moratorium, but as a person who turned their prior home into a rental property, this is quite problematic, especially if you still have a mortgage on that property, which is pretty much the case for most people. I am blessed that my tenant pays, but if they didn't, I would be SOL, since the mortgage on the home is still due. Again, the renters don't have to pay. Why do the homeowners have to pay? How is that fair? It makes absolutely no sense. It's almost as if the Democrats are trying to kill the entrepreneurial spirit in this country. It's almost like they are on a mission to destroy anybody who wants to make their own income and does not want to be held hostage to the 9-to-5 big box corporation or any 9-to-5 paycheck. This hurts us landlords who still need to pay the mortgage on the home for the tenant, on the home the tenant is renting. Big time apartment building owners can afford it. But people who own private properties and are renting out their house or condo are hurt badly by this. And I don't need Danita to tell me this. It's just common sense. How do our politicians not understand how bad this is for our country right now? How do they not understand that they are setting up the next property crash? If you guys remember back to 2008, how horrific was that property market crash? 2008, we saw one of the biggest real estate bubbles burst globally. In the UK, in the US. I mean, it sent shockwaves throughout the world. It was because we allowed everybody to leverage themselves to the hill to buy properties that they never should have been able to buy in the first place, properties they can never afford. As soon as interest rates went up, so did their variable loans. They got crushed and they lost their property. Or when they started losing their jobs, they weren't able to stay in their homes anymore. They couldn't afford it. So what happens naturally? The economy collapses. People lose their homes. It resets itself. And we begin the correction. What our government is doing today is exactly what China does to their economy. They prop it up falsely. They control the RMB currency. They don't let the market trade freely. If the property prices continue to rise too steeply, they don't allow anybody to buy property anymore. They literally control the direction the market heads. That is not an open economy. That is a very dangerous and misleading and false indication of what the economy really looks like. Well, that's what's happening in the United States right now. And we are supposed to be a free market, an open market. So when the government says renters don't have to pay anymore, they are propping the real estate marketing up falsely. And we all know what happens when markets are leveraged or propped up. History will absolutely repeat itself. This market will crash harder than we have ever seen it crash before. This will make the Great Depression look like a walk in the park. Because we have never manipulated and controlled the market like we are right now. And allowing renters to not have to pay their rent is just one way to keep that market propped up falsely, because their day will come. They will absolutely, at some point, have to pay that rent. And when it happens, and they can't, and all of these tenants at the same exact time get evicted, what do you think is going to happen? The inevitable. So what's interesting to see here on CNN's, because remember, we're on CNN right now. This is an article on CNN. What's interesting to see is how many viewers, CNN viewers, actually think this is insane. And when you have the Democrats thinking the Democratic policies are insane, you know we have a big problem. Draco says, here's the thing. If you are far enough behind to get evicted, you're not going to catch up. So they need to end this so that people can deal with the problem. Landlords with the people who can't pay rent, and the renters finding places they can afford. Very fair comment. He's absolutely right. If you are this far behind now, how on earth are you ever going to catch up? If somebody's rent, you have to remember, some of these people's rents, they're $3, $4, $5 grand a month. If you're going a year, that's $60,000. Unless the government's going to throw you 60 grand, you're not catching up. Your business, obviously, or what you're doing in life is obviously not working. So unless you change the root cause of that problem, you're screwed. You're not catching up. So one of two things has to give. You either go move into a place that you can afford, or you change what you're doing in life to bring in more money. But the government's not giving you any more money. There is no way on earth the Republicans are going to allow another stimulus. And if you think, well, the Democrats control all three branches, they have no choice, you're wrong, because they still have the filibuster. We will just keep blocking ideas from even getting to vote in the first place. That's the whole point of the filibuster. For those of you who aren't aware of the filibuster, we need that to stay. If we lose the filibuster, we have lost all hope. We might as well pack it up and go home. Seriously, there might as well not even be a Republican Party. This is why the filibuster was put into place. So before ideas even get to the floor, you can just destroy them right there on the spot because you need enough votes. Or you raise your hand, you have an objection. When you have an objection to something, you got to see that objection through. So the Republicans can just keep raising their hand, object, 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 object. We can drag their ideas on for years with objections. That's how you destroy things from ever getting to the floor in the first place. The filibuster is a great thing to look up or to understand. So read up on it, because it's the only saving grace we have right now to keep some sort of normalcy in America. So they're not going to catch up at this point. They are so behind, they are so screwed, that the only one who's going to lose out right now are the landlords. It's not like when the eviction freeze is over and they all come running for their 12 months of back pay. These people aren't going to have it. Then what's going to happen? That's when we're going to see the real estate market crash. So the government is being very reckless right now. They're delaying the inevitable. We're going to see a crash, no matter what they do, unless they're going to print so much money to pay for everybody's rent over the last year, they're screwed. And if they do that, you better believe mortgage or property owners like myself and other landlords are going to want some sort of compensation as well. Because, see, I've been paying my mortgage this whole time. I've had no choice. So isn't it funny how when you make people pay, they somehow find a way? But when you let them off the hook, all of a sudden, times become hard for them. If these same renters were forced to pay their rent, they probably would have worked harder. They would have worked a second job. They would have made it work, just like they have their entire freaking life. This isn't the first time they've fallen on hard times. We all fall on hard times. We all go through ups and downs in our life. We make it work because we've never in our life had the option to not pay. So we have no idea what it's like or what that even looks like. So we're doing these renters injustice. we're screwing the landlord, and we're only kidding ourselves. And it's going to be just a matter of time before the whole thing comes crashing down, just like it did in 2008. Justin says, no, it does not bring relief to anyone. Fair point. It just delays the inevitable. It places the burden on small businesses, middle-class families who have to front the rent for people who can't pay. The government should not be able to steal houses and let people live rent-free, which is what they've done. They've hijacked the landlord. That's exactly what they've done. They have stolen our property. They have forced landlords to give up their homes to people who can't afford to be living in them in the first place. Because if I can't evict a tenant, you've essentially hijacked my house. I can't get rid of a tenant because you told me I cannot. So who owns the home now? I don't own the home. You've taken my home. Technically, I'm the deed holder on the house, yes. But I have no say in who lives there. I can't kick people out. I can't renovate. I can't do anything. So these landlords have been held hostage for a year. The government has hijacked their home. This is the world we live in right now, where the government can literally take your home, or at least seize control of it for a certain period of time, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. This is what's going on. And you'd think there would be more outrage in America right now. You'd think it'd be all over the media. You'd think there'd be protests and riots in the street over this. But we've seen nothing. So either the American people have become extremely deranged and delirious over this whole thing, or they are raging concerns, or they are voicing their concerns, but the media just isn't talking about it. So something's not right here, and we continue to face a very, very big problem. Melissa said it's all fun and games until this is over, and landlords turn their properties into short-term rentals, making more money and avoiding anything like this in the future. Say goodbye to rental houses and having nothing but the apartment complex left. That's exactly what they're going to do. Landlords are done with this. They will never have faith in our government again. Who would want to be a landlord after this bullshit? Who would actually want to take the risk? It was already so difficult to begin with. Rental yields are 6-7%, and that's maybe after expenses, if you're lucky. So we all know the rental yields on investment property aren't high to begin with. It's a very tough business to be in. And the only way to make some serious money is if you literally own whole buildings, because then you might be making a couple $100 times 30 units. But then again, if the government hijacks those units and lets those renters get off, well, now you're out hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. And ultimately, the banks will foreclose on your building. The banks will keep the building. The banks will then be backed by the government. It's all corruption at its finest. And the only one who gets screwed here is the landlord who took the risk in the first place to help the economy. If you guys haven't noticed, the only people getting screwed in this entire sham of a pandemic are the business owners who constantly prop up this country. Small business owners make 50% of all of the workforce in the United States of America. We are responsible for the tax. Without businesses, there aren't any employees. So these business owners are now being shut down. It's a slap in the face to everybody who has worked their ass off to support jobs, to support the country. They are now doing the same thing to landlords. Landlords who have busted their ass to buy property, to provide homes for renters, to provide great tax payments for the government, are now being slapped in the face, used and abused, tossed to the curb. So who's going to want to take risk anymore after this is over? After the government just said, you know what? When times get tough, we don't really give a shit how much you invested or what sort of risk you took, because we're just going to hijack your business and your buildings and do whatever we want anyway. Guys, stay tuned. Right after the commercial break, we're going to take a look at what's going on in Georgia. There's a lot of voter suppression going on in Georgia, or at least the Democrats claim there is, and we're going to get to the bottom of it just after this commercial break. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to You Made It Political, where the voice of the keyboard warrior is finally heard, and the arguments presented are put to the political test. And now, here's your host, Matt Clark.
So we all know the Democrats are crying voter suppression once again. The only communities who seem to even think it's an issue are the black community, and for some reason the lesbian and gay community have been hijacked into this whole mess as well. And they're kind of thinking like, we don't have anything to do with this. Why are we getting lumped into the voter suppression issues? Well, that's because the Black Coalition, along with the LGBTQ plus community or civil groups, civil rights groups, are all joining together to say, hey, what's happened in Georgia is not right. It's criminal, it's inhumane, and we can't believe that Governor Kemp has allowed such insanity. Well, all they've done is change a few rules. But what rules have they changed that these minority communities are actually crying voter suppression over? Let's head over to Newmax today, where we're going to listen to Sean Spicer and Lindsey Keith dissect what's actually written in the new Georgia election laws. Because to be honest, guys, not much has changed, and you're going to be very surprised to see just how outrageous and childish the Democrats are acting once again over a law that's very minorly changed. So the Democrats' latest outrage has to do with the Georgia voting laws. Okay, all Georgia's trying to do, let me just kind of preface this real quick. All Georgia's trying to do is make the laws strict, not unfair, but strict, so there's no voter fraud. It's very simple. They don't want voter fraud. Now, I don't care what any of you think about the Trump election. I don't care if you think there was fraud, if you don't think there was fraud. The point is, shit got messy. It got very, very messy. We basically wrote the rules as we went along. We quickly scrambled to allow all this mail-in voting when we weren't ready logistically. There's no disputing that. I don't care if you don't believe the proof or the thousands of sworn affidavits. The point of the matter is that we were not ready to handle all of these drastic changes in the law so quickly. We did it because of COVID, which again, the Democrats quickly jumped on and ran with at 1,000-mile-an-hour pace. But there were a lot of issues with that. So we saw what happened throughout the United States. We saw what happened in Georgia during the runoffs. And Georgia said, never again. It was a shit show. It was a complete circus act. Ballots went missing. Dead people were allowed to vote, regardless of the fact that it wasn't widespread or enough to overturn an election. The fact of the matter is that there was voter fraud. So Georgia's putting a stop to it. They've tightened up their policies. So why, because Georgia wants to make it a little bit safer, are people crying voter suppression? Let's take a look.
Well, here's what the Georgia voting laws looked like previously before this law. Absentee ballots were verified with a voter signature. Number 2, there were no secure absentee ballot drop boxes in place. Number 3, it restricted weekend voting. Early voting for runoffs have 3-week early voting period. Number 5, the deadline to request an absentee ballot was 180 days before the election. Number 6, counties were required to certify election results within 10 days. And number 7, the public was allowed to distribute food and water to voters in line.
All right, well, that's how it used to be, right?
Yes.
So let's talk about what's actually in the bill, the changes that the Republicans made and that Democrats and all those folks are up in arms about. So let's look. Number 1, absentee ballots now have to have a verified ID. Oh my gosh. You actually have to have a driver's license or some form of valid ID, Lindsay. This is insane. I see what the left's all up in arms about. I mean, you actually have to show ID. I mean, it's like you want government benefits or you want to get on a plane or you want to have a vaccine passport. All of those things that the government normally has that none of the folks on the left get upset about.
Yeah. Well, the crazy thing about this too, Sean, is the left keeps saying that this is voter suppression. But how do they know if it's voter suppression if you're not requiring an ID to know if these are even voters in the first place if you're not checking an ID?
That's right. I mean, it's amazing that all these other things, they're so concerned about making sure you have an ID for, but not voting. That's the only thing they make an issue of. Why? Why? Why is that the only thing? And you've got to ask yourself that question because it defies common sense. All right, let's go back to the list. Keep going down this thing. Ballot drop boxes are allowed inside early voting locations and available during business hours. Okay, so based on before, they weren't. Now they are. That should please the left, right? Weekend voting expanded for the general election. Oh, more weekend voting. Again, that's something the left should like. Interesting. 4, voting for runoffs reduced to a minimum of 1 week. Okay, that's good. Deadline to request absentee ballots, 11 days before the election. I thought you just said a minute ago it was like 180, so now it's actually giving more people access. And now counties will be required to certify an election within 6 days, which I think frankly gives voters more confidence in an election that they know isn't going to get dragged on and has got to actually force these guys not to go home in the middle of the night like they did last time. And 7, the public is prohibited from distributing food or water to voters within 100 feet of the polling locations. This is the one provision, Lindsay, that's getting all the attention. The left is trying to make this all about the water. If you're in line and you're about to pass out and die, no water for you. That's just not simply true. And if you watch those Sunday shows, they frankly lied. It's within 150 feet. If you're at 151, which is not a lot, remember what 150 feet is before you get in, then you can bring water, you can hand off water, you can hand off food, you could get like a 5-course meal if you wanted. It has to do with people getting close to the voting booth and not allowing them to actually persuade.
Yeah, and a lot of times, Sean, when people are handing out water, it has a candidate's name on it. They're wearing a candidate's name shirt, something like that. And so it's absurd. If you're, like to your point, if you're within 150 feet, you're almost voting at that point.
Yeah, and it's funny. Most states have something like this. But let's look at what the bill, I guess it's the law now, actually says. This is from Section 33. This is what everyone's all up in arms about. It says no person shall solicit votes or distribute or display any campaign material, nor shall any person give, offer to give, or participate in the giving of any money or gifts, including but not limited to food and drink, to a voter. This code section shall not be construed to prohibit a poll officer from making available self-service water from an unintended receptacle to a voter waiting in line, i.e. if there's a drinking fountain or some kind of water jug in the corner with the little cups that we see all over the place, you can go do that. What is preventing and what the...
So, guys, we clearly get the point here. Not much has changed, okay? Not much has changed at all. And if we, again, go back and we take a look at the new Georgia election laws, all they're asking people to do is show ID. I mean, that's it. That's the big one. Why is showing ID have anything to do with voter suppression? And if you don't have a driver's license, you can get any sort of ID. So it's not like we're discriminating against non-drivers. So showing a valid ID is what the left are up in arms about, okay? Why? Why is everybody so furious about you needing to show an ID when you have to show ID to do everything in life? You go to the airport, you need to show ID. You go to a concert, you need to show ID to pick up your tickets. You show an ID to prove that you are the person you say you are. It's very simple. It's not rocket science. So why the faux outrage? Why is everybody so furious? And what does ID have to do with the black communities? You'd think everybody would be in uproar over an ID. Why is it that the black community is making such a stink out of showing ID? Ballot drop boxes allowed inside early voting location only during business hours. I think that's very fair. It's so we don't have these drop boxes going missing at the middle of the night. The election polling stations will put their drop box out at 9 in the morning while they work so they can see these drop boxes. Then they'll take them in at 5 p.m. It's very reasonable. But what they're up in arms over is this whole distributing food or water to vote in line. Well, first of all, you're adults. Drink some water before you go. Eat some food before you go. Okay? Like, nobody needs to tell you when to eat, when you can and cannot eat. So the fact that all of a sudden everybody's outraged over the fact that they can't hand out water anymore. First of all, there's a water fountain on pretty much every block in the United States. You're able to get water somewhere. Go buy a bottled water. They're making it sound like these people are voting in the most horrific conditions ever in 110-degree weather, and people are on the verge of dying from heat stroke if they don't get their bottled water. I can understand. It's a very hot day. There's a lot of elderly people out there. Okay, do something to make sure these people don't die of heat stroke. But in the middle of November, during the primaries, or during the election, the presidential election, there's not much of a risk of that. And you certainly don't need to be given food. I've never been to a polling station where I've actually gotten food. So not only is the black community and certain other minority groups playing the victim card again, because that's all the left know how to do. They take America for fools. Every time they don't get their way, let's make who's the victim this time? Is it black community? Is it illegal immigrants? Like, who are we going to victimize this time to pull the wool over the eyes of the American people? Which half the country gets sucked into believing every single time, while the other half is looking at this like, I can't believe you are all falling for this circus act. So we just saw there's not much that has changed. And I'll show you guys once again. Let's take a look once again. Not much has changed here. You need ID. Ballot drop boxes are allowed inside early voting locations only during business hours. Weekend voting has been expanded for the general election. So if anything, George has done you guys a favor. Early voting for runoffs reduced to minimum of 1 week. Fair. Okay, keep things a little bit more organized. And what's great is they've actually allowed you to register or request an absentee ballot up to 11 days before election. It used to be 180. So they've actually made it in your favor. If you want to request an absentee ballot, it's now 11 days versus 180. And counties will be required to certify election results within 6 days. We don't want these elections going on and on and on and on. It only opens it up for potential fraud. Having drop box ballots all over the city opens it up to be tampered with for fraud. All they've done is tighten the measures to eliminate potential for fraud. That's it. That's all they've done. So who's getting all bent out of shape over this? Well, you better believe the Black Civil Rights Group is now putting pressure on the PGA Tour to pull out of the upcoming Masters tournament in Augusta after Republican Governor Brian Kemp last week signed into law one of the nation's most restrictive voting rights. I mean, look at CNN making a spectacle out of this nonsense. Most restrictive vote. What on that list is most restrictive? I don't see anything wrong with that. The only thing that this has done is to stop you from cheating. That's it. So the fact that the left are up in arms over this just goes to show just how much they wanted to cheat in future elections, or just how scared they are of not being able to cheat in future elections. So these groups, the Black Civil Rights Group, is now trying to get the PGA to threaten Georgia and saying, we're going to pull out. Well, unfortunately, the Masters is not run by the PGA, or the PGA doesn't have to. Well, let me explain. I'll show you guys right here just how ridiculous of a situation the Black Civil Rights Groups is finding themselves in. Corey says the Masters is a private invitational tournament by Augusta National, not a PGA event. The PGA has no standing or say in the event's operation. Remember the last time a left-wing group pressured the Masters tournament sponsors? Augusta National just held the tournament commercial-free to counter, and the sponsors all came back. So they've tried this before. Not the Black Civil Group, but the last time a left-wing group pressured the Masters tournament sponsors, you know what Augusta did? They said, screw you. We're just going to hold the event without commercials. You guys are all going to lose. So they said, whoa, wait a second. Don't do that. And they all came running back. And good. So it's good to see that the Masters is going to put their foot down and say, screw you, to cancel culture. Because that's exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to get the Masters to cancel the entire state of Georgia. Well, the Masters is going to say, listen, first of all, the Black Civil Rights Groups is putting pressure on the PGA. That's the wrong group to put the pressure on, because the PGA doesn't call the shots for the Masters. So already they haven't done their homework, and they look like complete fools. And what's good to see is that we're on CNN right now. You'd think there'd be a bunch of left-wing, irrational, and highly supercharged liberals applauding this movement. They're not. People are pissed, both on the left and the right. Nathan says, why do leftists pretend black people are too incompetent to follow a few simple rules to vote? If the left lost the 90% of the black vote they receive on a regular basis, and black people as a demographic vote in the same proportions that white people do, left and right, there would never be another dingbat leftist elected. Promoting racial division is the Democrats' game, and the only game they have, pawning off basic and simple requirements as voter suppression. It's exactly what is going on right now. Why do the leftists pretend black people are too incompetent to follow a few simple rules to vote? And my argument here is this. I feel bad for the black community. I feel bad for the lesbian and gay community. I feel bad for every minority community that the Democrats continue to parade around as their victims. I don't even believe that most of the black community wants this attention. And I definitely know the lesbian and gay community want nothing to do with it. So I'm sorry for all of you guys. I'm sorry for minorities that are constantly being dragged in to this democratic and liberal nonsense circus act, and that you continue to be played like a fiddle every single time the Democrats don't get their way. It's completely and utterly irresponsible. It's a slap in the face to you all, and personally, I feel bad for you guys. But here's the thing. You are the ones who need to step up and start telling the Democratic Party to stop representing you when it comes to such nonsense. Until you stand up and start fighting them and say, listen, we want nothing to do with this. This is not our agenda. This is your shit show of an agenda that you continue to use us as part of your game. And we no longer want to be a part of it. So I'd like to see more of that out of you guys, because your silence certainly isn't helping this situation. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today here at You Made It Political. We are live every single morning this week at 10 o'clock in the morning. We may be going permanently at this time, so make sure you check on our website, youmadeitpolitical.com, or check the fan page, You Made It Political, for up-to-date show times. We are live here every single day. We stream to Facebook, YouTube. We're also on Amazon Music, Spotify, iTunes, and TuneIn. So you'll catch us on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for listening to You Made It Political with Matt Clark. Be sure to like, follow, or subscribe to the show.